Okay, great. And that was topic number one. Tell me more about your hobbies.
I like to stay busy. I like to ski, do outdoor activities, hike, camp. I live in a great state for it. I live in Utah, so I try to get outside and make the best of what nature has to offer here. And then, I like to try and give back. So I mentor young up and coming startups. Like to listen to music. I'm a big audiophile. I've been collecting vinyl for over 20 years now. Um, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
it's a
wow.
bad habit. It'll die with me. But like I try to stay busy and focus on or give my mind some opportunities to focus on things other than business.
Okay, so as much as I would like to jump already to the main topic, which is very fascinating, especially with this triangle of information that you just shared with us. So the main topic is basically weed insurance, right? Or sorry, cannabis insurance. And you are based in Utah, Salt Lake City or outside?
So, yep, in Salt Lake.
Okay. Are there other cities in Utah? Because I think that the only one that most people know is Salt Lake.
There are other cities
I
in
know.
Utah. Uh, and there are quite a few people actually that have moved here over the past few years. The state has pretty much doubled in size in the last 10 years.
I'm not surprised. So, how is that combination of a Jewish guy in Utah deals with, not deals, sorry, that will be a bad connotation here,
Right.
has a cannabis insurance company?
Well, I think living in a state that has a strong uh, uh, a strong conservative presence um, made me realize very early on in my professional career that I was at risk as a cannabis consumer of potentially losing everything that I had started to build. At the time, I had multiple professional licenses, and any type of a criminal conviction could make that go away, and therefore could make my livelihood go away. And that's a thought that stayed with me throughout my entire professional career. And, during my 20 years, I've held multiple professional licenses. I've built multiple companies and taken them from concept to acquisition. And am very, passionate about trying to spend my time on areas that are socially impactful, but at the same time, have the potential to generate significant revenue. And so after I sold my last company, I spent some time thinking about what was it that I was passionate about and what is a underserved population that is exposed to an unnecessary amount of risk. And that's how I landed on cannabis. I believe, I have a theory that there is a gap and therefore an opportunity to create a new type of insurance product that is tied to individuals' behaviors as opposed to the traditional models of risk and loss. And I think that there needs to be products that if an individual ends up on the wrong side of their legal yet risky behavior, that they have a means to hedge against that potential risk associated with defending oneself or navigating through the process that they may end up in.
Let's start with the product that you offer today as an MGA, and then we can always talk about, the bigger industry, in the insurance and the impact, a little bit of history behind the cannabis industry, especially as we're starting to see more and more states decriminalize them, making them legal. And of course, the federal, state, and all the different institutes that go like, oh my God, cannabis, we don't really know what to do with it.
Well,
And the funny part, I live in Los Angeles, California. It's legal here. I'm not a cannabis user. I'm an alcohol consumer. So I will defer to you all the knowledge, the question and the knowledge, because sadly I can't really contribute too much about it.
yeah. Well, I mean, so let's start at the high level for the people that are looking at this from an insurance standpoint. So the thing about what we're doing is that in some states we're considered a legal services plan. In other states we're considered a regulated insurance product. So just the level of regulatory barriers associated with launching state by state is incredibly complex. And those that have launched successful MGAs or other types of programs in the past know what type of work and investment really goes into that. To your point about the data, that's the what I find the most fascinating part about this. There's not good data. There's not good data on cannabis use. There's not good data on how THC impacts impairment and how other cannabinoids impact impairment. There is no test for impairment other than a police officer's perception when it comes to cannabis usage and cannabis impairment. It's a big gray area. Thinking about it from a data model perspective, there are no good data models on consumption either. So we're basically starting from scratch and building data models on individuals, or sorry, I shouldn't say individuals, collectively the user base. We're building data models from an aggregated and anonymized standpoint to be able to look at, okay, where are cannabis DUIs taking place? Where are we reaching members that are signing up? Even all the way down to things like attrition rate. We're basically starting from scratch. And what the product is,
You touched the DUI, and that's basically what you are
right?
covering today. So can you tell about what is the product that you're
Yeah.
providing?
So what we offer is a legal expense plan for cannabis DUIs. And basically, what that means is an individual pays a minimum of $15 a month. And in exchange for that, if they get charged with a cannabis DUI, then a $15,000 expense plan kicks in to cover all the legal and all the associated cost with defending yourself and navigating through the entire criminal justice system. So that's things like,
And why do we need that?
yeah, well, you need it because if you are accused of or suspected of driving under the influence of cannabis, there is a significant amount of expense that is incurred all before you're ever even charged with a crime. And not only that, but the reason why a cannabis consumer needs this type of product is because THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, stays in your system long after any impairment has faded. So, to think about it from a standpoint of regular consumption, the way that the federal government would define regular consumption is someone who consumes cannabis once a week. And that individual would fail a drug test, either a blood or a urine test, regardless of the last time that they consumed and regardless of wherever they are on the impairment scale. And so what that means is that sober drivers can be accused of and charged with a cannabis DUI because THC stays in their system and will show up in those drug tests.
How do they, what type of a drug test is it? So they will be standard with a cup, or they will blow into something, or is it like alcohol? How is
It's a
that?
great
How does it
question. So
work?
there's really two types of testing. First, there's what's called the field testing, which starts with a police officer asking questions and looking for patterns and behaviors. So, Gilad, the question may be something like, have you smoked today? And you may say, well, I don't do that. I don't smoke cannabis. I drink, or that's not my drug, or whatever you may say, right? But your response, and also the reason why I pulled you over as a police officer, that can be a reason to do enhanced testing. And enhanced testing means that I would pull you out of the car and force you to perform a variety of different tests. Anything from like touching your nose, walking a line, reciting the alphabet backwards, subtracting from 100 by 7. There's all kinds of tests that are designed to trip individuals up. And if somebody fails one of those tests, then the next step is if the police officer suspects that you are under the influence, the only way to test to verify that there is cannabis in your system is to cite you and arrest you, to tow your car and have it impounded, take you to jail, and then force you to submit to either a blood or a urine test. And then if you didn't cause any damage, or hurt anyone, you're most likely going to be released on your own recognizance, or you may need to be bailed out of jail. But after that, if you're going to wait for a drug test to come back from the toxicology or from the lab, and if any amount of THC or a nominal amount of THC shows up in your system, depending on the state that you live in, then that's enough to charge you with a crime. So if you get charged with a crime, you've got to hire a lawyer to defend yourself in court, right? And all of those expenses, all of that comes up before you ever have your day in court to defend yourself. And that's why cannabis users need a product like Reepher.
That's such an ordeal. This is painful. Wow. And that's maybe because you had a puff a day earlier, or
Well,
I don't know how much.
well,
What
so
are we
I'll
talking
give you a
about?
great example. So I just
Is it a risk? Is it a risk to be passive smoker? What are the
it
different
depends
levels
on the
here?
state, but let's use the first state that we just launched.
Hmm.
We just launched our product a couple weeks ago in Missouri, and thank you.
Congratulations.
And in launching in Missouri, it's medicinally legal for consumption, so you have to have a medical card. Okay,
Hmm.
but it is a zero tolerance state, which means that if you get pulled over or have a police interaction and the police officer suspects that you are under the influence, then the only way to test you is to go through that process that I just walked through. And if any amount of cannabinoids, whether it be CBD, THC, or any of the other cannabinoids, that's enough to charge an individual with a DUI.
So in my mind, I can see, a guy who. Sorry, let me start from the other. A person that is, I don't know, under chemotherapy and uses cannabis for pain, and then of course there is the, I don't know, the one of the kids that stole the cannabis from their relative. So those are two situations that pop into my head at this point. Yeah, I don't know. Is it so? Will it fall to that police officer to look like, okay, you look suspicious, most likely you are character number 2 versus character number 1? How, who's, the faith and apparently a lot of money and a very big ordeal that you need to go through, that going to fall to the
It
hands of what basically to the police officer. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the words.
That I mean
So
that's correct.
it's
It falls to the police officer. What's funny is like in Missouri, just as an example, an individual has a right that if they are asked to submit to a drug test, that the individual has a right. They have a 20-minute grace period to contact a lawyer, and so the lawyer can interject. but the police don't inform people of that right. You either know it or you don't. And so, you think about these situations where, a police officer is the person to make the determination to recognize a pattern or to use the training that they have had to make an assumption. And more oftentimes than not, they're probably right in their assumptions, but they're not right 100%. And if an individual gets taken from from a suspicion all the way through this process, there's no financial protection for somebody like that. If you're accused of a crime, what options do you have besides dipping into your savings or your credit in order to pay for that? There really isn't anything like that. And so medicinal patients who are consuming legally, if they end up on the wrong side of the risk of their consumption, can end up in a very costly situation and may not be able to get themselves out of it. And that's how people get caught up in the criminal justice system. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
So, taking half a step back to something that you mentioned earlier, in a few states you're going to be legal entity or sorry, legal. How did you find it? A
Legal expense
legal
plan. Yeah,
service,
legal expense.
legal
Mhm.
expense plan. In others, an insurance. And the big question will be, how do you underwrite that risk? Because as you mentioned earlier, again, there is no data, or there isn't available data or accurate data. How do you do the underwriting and the risk assessment? And how do you pick the right people? Because at the end of the day, we know that marketing is such an important tool in that funnel, because if you market to the wrong target audience, you're going to get bad risk.
Yeah. So there's multiple things to consider here, right? There's adverse selection, there's morale
Mhm.
hazard, there's an inherent assumption that every one of our customers is a cannabis consumer, right? So without getting into any trade secret information, you know, what
Of course, don't
right.
reveal your secret
What I'll
sauce.
say is that these are all risks that can be accounted for. But you have to have willing partners that understand that there needs to be a new type of model that individuals will subscribe to make sure that they are fully protected against the things that they're not protected against by traditional insurance and insurance type products.
How do you work with seniors? And what's the percentage of seniors with your
It's a
target
great
audience?
question. So, what I will tell you is
And then, of course, is it covered by Medicare, Med Advantage,
not
etc.?
covered by Medicare or Med Advantage. It would be more like an individual subscribing to AAA, right, or AARP or something like
Hmm.
that. But
Yeah.
one thing I will say is that a lot of our testing, when we were introducing the concept of Reepher and starting to shop it to who we thought might be the buyers, one of the subsets was geriatric patients over the age of 65. And the reason is because they are
Hmm.
getting recommended cannabis or prescribed cannabis later in life. And that the car is their lifeline to the outside world. And if an individual lost their driver's license because of a suspicion of driving under the influence of cannabis, it could potentially be catastrophic for someone that only has the car as their means of getting around. So we do think that there is a
Hmm.
market there. What we don't know at this point is how costly is it going to be from a marketing perspective to get to those people.
And I will add to that that once you take their mobility or that cost, everything that causes some sort of a spike in the cost in the planned life of a 65 years old, so a senior and whatever comes left, it's going to rattle their future
Yeah.
plan and retirement. They are not getting more money. It's already set. That's their pension, their 401ks, whatever. Their wealth and health are so joined at that point that everything that will introduce a new cost will will also impact their health and as a result their longevity or their quality of life because they are so intertwined together and coupled and impact one. You have a health problem, your wealth will go down the drain,
Well,
the drain as well. Now it's
and
a little.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
and
go ahead, sorry.
it's a great correlation back to the product Reepher itself and what we're offering. We're not just saying we'll pay for the lawyer. We're saying we'll pay for all that other stuff that adds up because you're going to get your license taken away. You're going to get your car towed and impounded. You're going to be forced to go through all of these different processes that take time and money to get yourself through. And so that's the whole kind of point with what we're trying to establish here is we're focusing in on the behavior and the fallout effect that can come from it, and putting our focus there and excluding everything else, and that allows us to keep the premium amount or the membership plan amount low, but still keep the benefit relatively high.
Okay, if you don't mind, we are reaching almost the end of the episode, but I'm very curious because we've seen the cannabis industry growing at the beginning. No one wanted to touch the cannabis industry, but still, so many people were flocking into it and created and were navigating the regulation. And needless to say that, you know, here in Los Angeles and California, there's like, hey, no problem. We'll be more than happy to work with you. Just make sure that you fill ton of regulation, a lot of forms, and pay fees to all of these new bodies that go like, oh my God, here is a new, costs of taxation. Are we still in that problem in terms of banks don't want to work with you, or there are all kinds of banks that go like, just don't mention our name? And also,
No,
okay,
it's it it's still the Wild West, and it's still very difficult to navigate, and there are pressures that come from a variety of different sources, from capital to regulatory to taxation, to the illegal markets. There's just a lot of pressure and growing pains that is shaping the market right now. And I feel bad for the operators that have to continually navigate all of these issues. I'll say from our perspective, where we even run into a problem is we have nothing to do with the plant. Nothing
yeah,
from anything from growing all the way through sale and distribution, but because we are cannabis adjacent,
mm-hmm.
that we've had VCs tell us that they're not able to do deals like that because of morality agreements and their or morality clauses in their LP agreements. So cannabis is still, kind of the redheaded stepchild, but that's also, that's where the opportunity is right now to get in and do it right. So when the federal government does move, that the individuals that are already establishing themselves as players are most likely to have successful outcomes as opposed to those that are going to want to try and get into the game after the fact.
Did you get a VC investment or you're based on the angels and bootstrapping?
So Angels, right now, we are raising capital. So if any of your listeners are interested, they can reach out to me. Hopefully, my email address will appear on this after the fact, but would be happy to talk to you about what we're doing.
Don't worry, all the LinkedIn tags will be there as well, and the links and then, hey, if you want to talk to Justin Kahn, this is the way to do that. And you can actually share your email for the people who are going to hear it only audio and not just the video.
Yeah. So my email is the letter J followed by my last name, which is KAHN at Reepher, and that's spelled REEPHER.com.
Fantastic. And now I'll ask you the last question that I'm asking everyone that comes on the show, and that can you give us a recommendation, something that you picked up since March 2020?
Hmm.
You know, it doesn't matter. It can be even before that. A recommendation, a
I
life hack, something that it can be a movie,
yes,
a book,
I
life hack, whatever that.
my favorite life hack is 2 times a day, 10 minutes of silence. Try to go outside if at all possible, but don't bring my phone with me. Not listening to music, just trying to get out and reconnect with natural sound.
Mhm.
I find that that's very helpful for me in retuning my focus onto whatever I need to concentrate on.
I just wonder how will that work in New York City, that you cannot even open the window. Huh. Okay.
I
Hey.
think I think you know there are natural sounds in New York City.
Oh, they
I
are.
think you can do it. Yeah.
No, it's one of those little things that remember when people used to smoke, and no matter what's the weather, they find a way to go down and have a cigarette break, a sun break. That sounds a little bit better. They will figure out
Hmm.
that out. Fantastic. Justin, thank you very, very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure meeting you in New York and now on the show. Thanks.
Gilad, thanks for having me, my friend. It's always good to see you. Keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch soon.
My pleasure.